Okay, so today I'm going to be talking about interracial marriage, but a biblical approach to it. And first, I want to preface this project with saying that the main reason why I decided to talk about interracial marriage is because my family is multiracial. And at first, I really didn't want to do this for my senior seminar, but Mr. Satterfield said I should. And I thought about it, and I thought, like, why wouldn't I talk about it? Like, am I ashamed? No. So, yeah, that's why I'm doing it. So, this is a picture of my family. And they're the reason that I'm doing this project. So my dad is ethnically Chinese, and my mom is Caucasian with half German descent. So this is a quick overview of what I'm going to be talking about today. So first I'm going to talk about the history and origins of interracial marriage, and then I'm going to talk about today, and then my argument, and then the importance. So first off, what is interracial marriage defined as? According to the International Encyclopedia of Marriage and Family, interracial marriages are defined as any marriage that takes place between two people who are from different racial or ethnic groups. Really, I think this definition is kind of arbitrary because it was made by our society, who tends to only look at the skin color of people when defining races and ethnicities. However, 1 Samuel 16:7 says, "People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart." So I think by even defining it in the first place, it kind of puts them in a box because it's making interracial marriages kind of like stand out from all other marriages. And we're also so intent on drawing lines between races and people, but I'm still going to use the definition for my presentation because I need a word to describe it. So, okay, so first the history and origins. So, to begin, we're going to start with race itself because this is what has been at the root of all controversy to interracial marriages. And this is the way I think racism has kind of progressed starting from the beginning. So first, God's plan for humanity. His plan was for all of us to be unified in one. Like Genesis 1:27 says, he created everyone in his own image. And Galatians 3:27 through 29 says, "For as many of you as were baptized into Christ have put on Christ. There's neither Jew nor Greek, there's neither slave nor free, there is no male and female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus." So he doesn't distinguish one race as more important than another. But unfortunately, we have distorted this picture through our sin, which has led to a past of oppression for race and interracial marriages. Okay, so first, when talking about race, I'm going to expand on what happened in biblical times. So some examples of oppression against certain races were the enslavement of the Israelites. They were persecuted for their religious and ethnic origins when they were enslaved by the Egyptians. But then also on the other hand, they persecuted Samaritans, which were families made up of interracial marriages between Jews and Gentiles. And the Israelites looked down upon them as unclean because they weren't purely Jewish. And I think that although some Samaritans were pagans, this doesn't mean that all of them were unbelievers just because of their bloodlines. For example, the Good Samaritan. And so I would say that the Israelites, I feel like, are kind of trying to find other ways to condemn their interracial marriages because, yeah. Okay. So now we're going to move on to the U.S. and the history of that. So there were both positive changes, but mostly negative aspects of interracial marriage in the U.S. In history. Positive change would be the first officially recorded interracial marriage in the U.S. was actually between Pocahontas and Englishman John Rolfe, so that was good. But also around this time, the idea of white supremacy began to take root, jeopardizing interracial marriages, and this stemmed from the European Enlightenment because the Western race made a lot of discoveries and then people started putting them on a pedestal. And then more prejudices were formed because of white supremacy, and this even led to American slavery, which caused many new racial barriers to be put up that weren't broken down for a long time. Okay, so now we're going to talk about anti-miscegenation laws, but this is not misogyny, this is miscegenation, so not the term from today. But so an anti-miscegenation law is any law that restricts interracial marriages, and there were like a bunch of these in our history. So this is a quick timeline from the first British colonial law all the way to there were like 3 attempts of people trying to revise the Constitution to make interracial marriages illegal throughout the like entire U.S. And then by 1966, 41 of the 50 U.S. states had bans on interracial marriages. And if you think about it, this was only 57 years ago, so that really was not that long ago at all. And these laws consist of things like fees for having biracial children, and imprisonment for being in an interracial marriage. Okay, so then there was a breakthrough in 1967 on Loving Day, and this was a white and black / Native American couple, Richard and Mildred Loving, and that's a picture of them right there. They were arrested for their marriage, and they took it to the courts, and they won. So finally, after decades of bans on interracial marriage in Loving versus Virginia, in 1967, interracial marriage became legal throughout the U.S. And when this happened, 16 states had to overturn their laws, and there had, up to that point, been 300 years of oppression on interracial marriage in America. Okay, so now we're going to talk about it today. So first, I want to say there's been lots of improvements since the past, because I don't only want to speak on the negative treatment of interracial marriages today, but I also want to emphasize how far we've truly come since the past. So for example, like in 2015, interracial marriages had more than tripled since Loving versus Virginia. And in 2021, 94% of American adults overall approved of interracial marriages. So here's a graph from 2008, and this just shows some of the most common ethnicities between interracial marriages, which the top three would be white, Hispanic, and Asian. And then, okay, so now we're going to move to the opinions of today, mainly the common negative opinions that some people still have toward interracial marriages, even though they're now legal throughout the U.S., and they have been for 60 years about. But first of all, I want to say that these types of opinions are oftentimes actually really overlooked because other issues in our culture get more priority. For example, conflicts between like same-sex marriages and stuff like that, people prioritize that over things like this. But nevertheless, these are some common opinions today that still exist. So first, I think there's disgust toward interracial marriages that can happen. There can be hate, and thirdly, and the most common is misconceptions. So for disgust, there was a study from the University of Washington that found that when people were presented with photos of interracial couples versus photos of same-race couples, their brains typically activated higher than usual in the insula area, which is the area of the brain where like disgust develops in there. And this just shows that our culture already has an ingrained, skewed view of interracial marriages because of our past and everything that's happened. Secondly is hate. So some people commit violent actions toward interracial marriages today. Some of these have included CBS News reports such as people have tried to stop interracial weddings. They've denied these couples rents, disagreed to give marriage licenses, and there's even been a few murders actually. So yeah, and then third and most common are misconceptions, which a lot of people have these, which it makes sense because no one really talks about stuff like this. But so some of the most common misconceptions that people have toward interracial marriages include that people think they're only between black and white people. They think that the motivation for them is to have like an exotic partner, or like it's almost like a trend kind of to be in an interracial relationship and have like a unique looking family. But this is a totally wrong view of marriage in general if you're just thinking about like how your family looks, because it's not about appearance. And so why do I think people think things and act like this? I think it's for two reasons. One, because they're scared, and two, because some people still think interracial marriages are actually morally wrong. So this is an example of a verse that someone could take out of the Bible and use it to say that interracial marriages are wrong. Deuteronomy 7:2-5, you shall not intermarry with them, giving your daughters to their sons or taking their daughters for your sons. And people misinterpret this, which it's actually very easy to misinterpret this verse without reading the surrounding context. So if we read further in this Deuteronomy verse, we see that God never actually says interracial marriages are immoral here. It's not even God speaking actually, but it's Moses, and he's speaking on a command of God telling the Israelites not to intermarry with the Canaanites because the Canaanites worshiped other gods. It wasn't even about their race. So this isn't even a question of race, but a matter of staying true to God. And God's saying, don't marry someone who is an unbeliever. He's not saying don't marry someone of another race. Okay, and then here is a passage in the Bible where God affirms interracial marriage. So this is Numbers 12, and it's Moses and his marriage with his wife. She was of a different race than him. And Miriam and Aaron didn't approve of this marriage, but God did, and he reprimands them for that. And he says this by saying that Moses was faithful in all my house, and he says Moses beheld the form of the Lord. Okay, so now I've said a lot about what the Bible says, but I'm going to say my argument for why I think interracial marriages are morally correct. Okay. So first, I think they're within God's plan for marriage. So number one, God commands humanity to marry and start families. So Genesis 1:28 says, "Be fruitful and multiply." Secondly, if this is his design for marriage and it's an institution of love and devotion between a man and a woman, as long as a marriage doesn't defy that, it is morally right. And a lot of times people will, like I was saying, pick out verses and things like that, but there's nowhere in the Bible where God actually says interracial marriages are wrong. However, there are practices that he does say are wrong in the Bible that people just want to overlook, which these include like sexual immorality, polygamy, adultery, and abuse. Okay, so now if we also think logically about this, interracial marriages are still just normal marriages. They're not meant to be lesser or step down from other marriages, but instead on the same level. If one is afraid to marry someone of a different race for other reasons, that is not an actual desire, and therefore that's not a true marriage anyways, because there's no love. And then therefore, if they're just normal marriages, and they follow God's law in general, then they're upright in God's eyes. So conclusively, marriage is both a part of God's plan and ultimately about love. If a marriage is obedient to the Lord, is upright no matter what races are involved. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about the importance. So we talked about how interracial marriages are morally right, but are they good? It was reported in a survey that when American adults were asked if marrying someone of a different race was good, only 39% agreed. 9% outright said that interracial marriage was bad for society. The Pew Research Center described these as commendable statistics when I was doing my research, saying that we've improved a lot of stuff, but I disagree. Here are the ways that I believe interracial marriages and multiracial families are good for society. Because they provide the world with beautiful diversity, unique perspectives, and meaningful unity. And I may be a little biased, obviously, but I can see an extraordinary illustration of this in my own life with my family and my parents from two distinct backgrounds coming together in a loving and God-honoring relationship. And I also think that these relationships are important because families like mine and others, we have a unique opportunity that not everyone else has to display unity between cultures. That there's lots of tension in our world today between cultures, but I think interracial marriages and families display unity that we need to see. And so finally, to tie everything together, I'm going to end with this quote from Maya Angelou that says, "Love recognizes no barriers. It jumps hurdles, leaps fences, penetrates walls to arrive at its destination full of hope." And it's the end.
Ladies, I'll offer to you. You got any questions or comments for Chloe?
Chloe, you did a wonderful job in speaking as someone in an interracial marriage. I think that is something that is so beautiful, that my kids get the best of both worlds. Now, my kids don't. In fact, here we had an issue because Andrew has blonde hair and blue eyes. So when he said that he is half Hispanic, because then he was told to his face, "No, you're not." I mean, just arguing because he doesn't look that way. So depending on what is your thought about the kids when they exert their, I guess their excitement or their love of that half, especially in front of others, and they're not received well.
Well, I think they should, because they should be proud of that. That's their family. For example, sometimes when me and my sister go in public with my mom, people will come up to her and be like, "Oh, where did you adopt your kids from? We're thinking about adopting." And that's kind of making an assumption that you shouldn't just directly make, because you don't really know the family situation and stuff like that. And so I don't know. I just feel people shouldn't just make assumptions like that. But and then she's like, "Actually, they're not adopted, so." And then it's just really awkward.
I think that this is a very important topic, and I haven't heard another senior seminar about it. But as we become a more diverse Greenville, which we are, I think it's so important. Just today, there was a wonderful gentleman and his wife that were here on campus, and I got to talk to them for a long time. And I think that as we grow as a school and as we grow as a community, that these are the issues that we to confront. And I don't think there's a better way to do it than through the biblical lens like you did. So you did a wonderful job.
Sorry, yes. No, I interrupted you. No, extremely well spoken as usual. Very articulate. And Chloe's one of my best writers in AP Lit, and she does just as well orally. Okay. So yeah, I'm really glad that you did this, and it helps me get to know you even more. And Sophie, who's not leaving me yet, unlike you, have the nerve to leave me. So have you as a family, you just mentioned one example, have you experienced negativity, or like, even maybe this is too personal and feel free to say, no, I'm not gonna answer this, but like, what about like your dad's parents or your mom's parents? Did they have any issues when your mom and dad said, hey, like, we're dating, we're in love, we're gonna get married? Like, was there stuff from the past?
I don't think like they actually did, but sometimes it can be a little weird, like when we're hanging out with like one side of the family or the other, like my mom, she has to like learn some of our like Asian traditions and stuff, and it can be weird for her because like one time we were in a restaurant and we were just all, I think it was a Chinese restaurant, I don't remember, with my dad's extended family,
right?
And then like the waiter came over and like gave my mom a fork, and she's like, I can eat with chopsticks, like, yeah. So stuff like that happened. It's just kind of like, again, about assumptions, like, yeah.
No, I think that's the key here. Yeah. Oh. Wow. Yeah, I'm really glad you did this. I love this.
Yeah, so a couple things. One, great job. You're confident. I'm glad that you chose the topic, and I know I was probably a little more pushy than I typically am with it, but I'm glad. I'm happy. I'm glad, happy for you. I'm happy you had the opportunity to think through it and express it, because I think, yes, you spoke well. I think it was more nerves than anything that made you go 100 miles an hour, but that's fine. It's normal, right? That's typical. But let me add to the confidence that you should have, because I think you should have a lot of confidence in this. And that is that it wasn't just that you chose the right words and had some good information. You thought through it logically. Like you built a really solid argument. Like, I can specifically look at what you said and say, okay, here's some biblical evidence. And even when you transition to an actual argument, you were still bringing in biblical consideration, right? Like, you do a really good job of putting ideas together, and that's a skill. Like, that's a gift. So like, don't shy away from that. Like, when you're thinking through stuff, it works. You've got it.
Travis, can I say that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry, just to, because that's the other, I'm glad Travis said that, Mr. Satterfield said that. Because Chloe, a lot of the arguments have a biblical immigration tacked on the end.
Yeah.
But what was very evident in yours is that it was embedded throughout.
Yes.
It wasn't, and sometimes it's best to tack it on at the end. It's okay. But I love how you brought it in and embedded it into every part. And when you are giving an argument or persuading somebody, to use both the logic and the biblical worldview and masterfully put that together is really, really impressive. So that's a very, I'm sorry.
No. And I'm glad you added to it, because that gives me permission to keep going. No, I love that, because on a grander scale of things, as your Bible teacher, I'm really happy that you're even able to do that. You know, for a lot of people, their whole hang up with Christianity is that Christians have not handled so many things well, right? And unfortunately, a lot of the laws and a lot of the prejudices and hatred that you're talking about, Christians have actually been at the forefront of that. And it's ridiculous. And I'm not trying to call out any particular institutions within the greater Greenville area, but I'm just saying, like, we have unfortunately had a legacy. We've had a legacy of that.
Give you the initials?
Well, we'll see. But all I'm saying is, I love when people, especially when my students are like, racism in the Bible, like, what's going on there? And I'm like, just study it. There's no way like back in the day when slaves were trying to go, when we still had slavery in the United States, and slaves were trying to go to church, and because the overwhelming majority of them were wonderful Christians, right? They had to, in order for slaves to have any amount of the Bible, they had to take out about 30% of it, and then they had to edit another 40% of it. So they had to change or eliminate most of the Bible just to have slaves be able to read the Bible, because they were so worried that if slaves get the Bible, they're going to read verses like "You'll know the truth, and the truth will set you what?" Like, no, we can't have them say that, right? Anyways, so I love that this is so saturated with the Bible because, and I'm sorry, I got to hit the punchline. That story about Moses's wife being
I was
from the
gonna
north,
say that part, but I was
I
afraid I'd
love
run
it.
out of
From
time.
the North African kingdom of Cush, Moses married a black woman and his sister didn't like it. And so you know what God did? God gave her leprosy, which turns your skin bleached white. God's got a sense of humor.
You can read about that in my
And it's
paper.
awesome.
I talked
Yeah,
about
oh, I know. I'm good. I just wanted for everybody else's benefit.
That's so good.
Okay, so question. I can't let you get out of this without giving some, putting your feet to the fire a little bit. In terms of preference, it seems like there's something to the animosity towards interracial marriages. It seems like there's something in terms of culture where there's a preservation, there's a need to preserve something, right? Can you speak to the idea, whether personal experience or whatever, where it just seems like a lot of people who are against interracial marriages, and I hate to say this, even like family members of mine feel this way, where it's like when interracial marriage happens, then you're losing a culture for the predominance of another culture. And so to prevent losing culture, you want to stay away from that. That's the rationale anyways. Can you speak to that? Like, is that what's actually happening here? Like, do you feel less of one than the other? What can you say to
I
that?
think I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
So, like, what I was saying at the end was I think they are important because they actually blend the cultures, which shows how they can be unified, which I think is a good thing because you don't just want everyone to be separated. And then also, I think part of the reason that people like can be so intent on the idea of like having like pure race or whatever is because of like everything that's happened in our past, and like any like conflict between one race and another, it like carries on like through history, and then people think about that and then they just like they don't want to deal with that anymore.
Yeah, I hear that. Yeah, there's just something. Yeah, I want to think on this more because you made me you were flipping off switches in my mind where it's like yeah, what about that? And it seems like I don't see why someone would try to make the argument that an interracial marriage it's not a zero sum game. It's not in either your dad's culture or your mom's culture. It's we have two cultures that we get to celebrate, right? And at least that's what your story sounded like. Now, maybe that's not everybody's story, but unity doesn't require loss. Unity doesn't require, it may require some self-sacrifice, but it doesn't seem like unity necessarily requires one cultural identity to be hushed while the other cultural identity gets to still be there.
To me, it makes your life richer.
Right. I'm saying it's like, it's not like, what are we going to fill our 100% with? It seems like we have now 200% worth to celebrate.
Yeah. So like, kind of my main point, well, like one of my main points was that like, it doesn't really matter if it's interracial. Like, we draw these lines and stuff like this, but in the end, we all were like created by God, and so we're all just from Him anyways. And there was like another study I found where it was like, I mean, technically, if you think about it, almost any marriage could be an interracial marriage. If you think all the way back into time, like everyone has different.
Well, like me, like I have Italian ancestry. I have this ancestry. You know, like.
So like we can't really draw these lines because
it's just weird.
There's no basis.
Yeah.
The first, so history teacher time, the first race riots in the United States were between Irish and Scots.
Yeah.
And, like people from Scotland and Ireland.
They were both white.
And I'd have a hard time telling the difference between people from Scotland and people from Ireland. But they were race riots. They're, like in the history books, you'll find them as race. That's wild. Okay, anyways, any classmates, y'all got anything for Chloe? Any questions, comments? Nicole.
I don't really have like a good question, but I just wanted to say that like I really like this project because I'm also an interracial baby, and I feel like being like a baby, like you don't realize it until you grow up, and then you like because when you look at your
Yes,
parents,
I totally
you
agree.
you never think about that until you grow up, and then you see like, yeah, I'm like a little different, and then they're like, oh, what are you, what are you, what
So
are
they
you?
feel that point out.
Yeah, and it's just like different because when you grow up, it's like, wow, this is like I have two like different families. So, but you never notice it when you're little. But I just thought it was a good project, and it like kind of made it like touched my heart, made me feel special because it's never really talked about. So.
It's awesome.
Thank you.
Good. See, I told you you should have done this. Like,
Well, I did do it, so.
I know. Anything else? All right, good.